All right, welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Yecki. I'm the Product Engagement Manager at InfoReady. Again, thank you for joining us for this training webinar. We're going to focus on transitioning to InfoReady from a prior system. Joining me today is Carlos Moncada, Director of Client Services, and he's going to help manage the Q&A. As always, just some top of show reminders here. So this webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes and we are recording. So if you have to hop off or you want to share it with a colleague later, you are welcome to. We'll take Q&A throughout. I think we have a smaller group today, so we should have plenty of time for any of your questions that you want answered or things that come to mind. So just use that Q&A option. And if we aren't able to answer live, then someone from InfoReady will follow up with you. As you already saw, there are poll questions throughout. There's also a specific webinar survey when you leave, just kind of when you close out of the Zoom link there. But we also want to remind you that we have our annual client survey happening right now. So most, if not all of you should have received an email about that. So please take 10 or 15 minutes to share feedback via that annual survey. We love to hear from you, and definitely put in any webinar ideas you have in those surveys as well. So for today's topics, just kind of at the beginning here, this topic today will have a few more slides. We really wanted to gear this webinar specifically for folks that are newer to InfoReady, or maybe you've used InfoReady for a while, but you're thinking about kind of transitioning over a prior process or integrating another tool and kind of migrating that over to using InfoReady. So my goal and hope is really to give you a framework of thinking about ways that you might start making some of these changes, also giving you some concrete tools and exercises. So that's kind of lots of options here for all different types of learners is my hope today. So I'm sure some of you have seen this or heard of it. If you've talked with any folks at InfoReady, we kind of use this brief little diagram a lot. So a lot of times when folks do start using InfoReady, which is generally a new technology, right? It has to be integrated with your prior process in some way. Of course, we're going to want it to be all of your process for all the things, but sometimes that needs to be more of a gradual transition, which we'll talk about. But ultimately, it is going to give you a new process. So even if your kind of prior process is super solid and you love it and it's working well, just by having a new tool, there's going to be some things that are a little bit different. So just kind of keeping that in mind, I think, is helpful when you use any new technology, but especially InfoReady. So one thing that can be really helpful, especially if you're thinking about kind of a specific process that you want to transition over, is making a love it, like it, or leave it list. So this is just a very kind of brief table with examples that I've heard of from clients. So the idea here is in the love it column, you would want to list any things in your current process or programs that are currently working really well, that you'd like to carry over when you start using InfoReady. So in my example, single sign-on might be one of those things, right? It allows people to log in with your institutional credentials, makes that process really simple for them. And so you would definitely want to keep that when you start using InfoReady, which you can. So that's a good one. Like it would be kind of things in the middle, right? So these are things that are generally more positive about your process than negative. But either you might want some tweaks to them, or maybe they're just not quite as high of a priority during the transition, right? So they might be a little lower on your priority list. So things like Excel reports or specific Excel reports might fall into this column, right? So certainly you're going to need some sort of reporting capability, but sometimes very specific reports you could kind of go either way on. And then leave it as you expect. These are things that really aren't working well for your process or that you'd really like to change. So one I hear of a lot is having to email applicants individually, right? That just takes a lot of work. It's a lot of time, a lot of email inbox management. So that might be something that you really want to get rid of. And so making a list like this with any process that you're hoping to change or system that you're hoping to replace can really guide as you make that transition, right? So if something is kind of ticking off all your boxes on the love it, but it also, drags with it some of these things that you're trying to leave behind, maybe it's not the best fit. This is a quick note that we'll include the slides too with the recording. So if you want to take this as you will and print it or use it, you're welcome to. So another way to kind of think about this is just some key differences of before InfoReady and after InfoReady. So this is something that we walk new folks through a lot. But generally, if you're starting with the system and you've never really used it before, some things that you'll likely notice that are different. So first being that a lot of times your application materials before InfoReady, they came in very piecemeal, or you might have had to, you might be missing some requirements. Whereas with InfoReady, you can make all of those materials required up front, and they're always going to be collected in the same order, which then leads to, right, this packet idea. So a lot of times before InfoReady, you're assembling packets by hand. We're going to have all of those download directly for you, and everything's going to be in the same order. So that's something that's really helpful. Getting more into the review process, a lot of times you might be doing things with shared folders or emails or spreadsheets. This is the part that InfoReady can really help streamline for you. We'll talk a decent amount about this today. It's usually the key difference that folks transition over. With communication, right, those separate emails, whereas in InfoReady, some of the communication is going to be via email, but you can actually do it through the platform. So that's going to help streamline a lot of things. And then this bottom one is kind of IT involvement. So especially when I've worked with folks that transition away from homegrown systems, one thing I hear a lot is with the homegrown system, right? If any kind of change needs to be made, it has to go through IT. Whereas in InfoReady, we're putting as much in your hands as we can. So any kind of in-flight changes or helping your applicants or reviewers, you're able to do those things kind of on the ground. So the rest of today, really what we're going to talk about is where the most common kind of inputs and outputs live in InfoReady. So just as example, things in your process that we would consider inputs would be any kind of cover sheet, certainly collecting information on your applicants or about their project, attachments, reference letters, approvals, reviews and rankings, all of that kind of data that you gather to then make a decision, right, about that application or form. And then you think more of the outputs. So things like PDF packets, all of your Excel reporting, any kind of follow-up or progress report, and probably others as well. So if anyone has other inputs or outputs that aren't on here, feel free to ask a question about those and we can talk through those, right? But the main goal of today is to help you understand where these different pieces live in InfoReady, or certainly, right, how you'll be able to generate these different outputs. Last thing, as far as slides go, I just want to put in a little plug for some good old paper process mapping. So this is actually an example of a student leadership program that I used to facilitate, and literally me putting it on a piece of paper with colored markers. And the reason I did this is what you'll see in InfoReady. A lot of what we do is kind of force you to think a little more linearly, right? We're going to do step one before we do step two. But we also understand that your process is probably going to look a lot more like this, where things are branching off and different numbers are reducing as you go on. So I think there's a huge benefit to drawing out your process as well, whether it's on a whiteboard or scratch paper. Here I kind of color coded things to help me think through. I also wrote the number of applicants, right, that we're kind of getting down to. So the goal is to end up with a team of 30 students. And so we say 20 for a yes, 20 go on a wait list, things like that. Now, not all of these pieces will end up going in InfoReady, but just kind of having that side by side as you're building in the tool can be really helpful. And then the last thing, again, just kind of a plug for paperwork and being a human, right? I know there's a lot of good AI tools out there. I don't think they're quite as good at doing things like this at this point, especially if you're working with a team of people. It'll probably actually take you a lot less time to just get together with your core administrative team and kind of map it out. But then maybe have AI make it a little cleaner for you without my chicken scratch here. So, all right. With that, then let's kind of get into what InfoReady actually looks like. So again, what we're going to talk about is those different pieces of your current process or program, and where those items will then fit in the platform. So what I'm showing on my screen now is just a sample InfoReady site, and I am not even logged in yet. So this is kind of the standard view that your potential applicants would have, right? Students, faculty. And what I wanted to show you is a specific program kind of announcement, or what we call the details page. So if I pull up my November webinar training sample, so the first thing that you'll notice for this page, it does have a direct link. So a lot of you may be used to advertising your programs on a separate web page and kind of linking to some form. So you can certainly still do that with InfoReady. So there will be a link that you can share. But oftentimes this main details page can replace a lot of the high level information about your program. So there's always a dates section. So here you can see my deadline. I also have this kind of custom date that I've added of telling them when the decisions will be released. So if you have other time points in your process that you want to advertise up front, you can do that. And you'll also be able to show high level information about how many times they're allowed to apply, things like that. Certainly including any documentation or files is a good idea. And then specifically the description. So this is often where if you have like a PDF right now, or again, that website blurb, you can kind of copy and paste that over so that it's all within InfoReady. So this is the public part, right? Again, what your potential applicants would see. But I am going to now go to kind of the admin view. So what most of you all have. So when you are setting up your opportunities, the very first details page is where you're making all those adjustments. So again, whatever public information you're sharing right now, you will be able to kind of slot it in the different fields on this page. So anything from the title, certainly dates and deadlines here. You can see this is that custom date that I added. So that can often be a good idea. So that shows up right under the funding section. You can add text fields or date fields to explain to them just extra information that's not kind of already hard coded in here. And then you can also drop in your description. So that's usually the snippet from an existing website. You can add pictures in here if you want, and then including any longer files. So the supporting documents, if you already have like an instructions manual or a longer RFP or something, this is where you would want to put it when you're mapping it out in InfoReady. So let me pause there. So Carlos, if any questions come in so far just about kind of the overall topics at the beginning or what the details page kind of maps to?
Yeah, we've got a question here. What admin type do I need to have to be able to add options on the details page?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'm assuming they're probably talking about like category and cycle and the funding orgs. Is that how you take it, Carlos? Okay. Yeah, so you will need kind of the top level access in your site. So if you don't see these little plus signs and you need a category added, right? So if you're making something or a cycle, and you don't see what you need in the list. If you know who your super or global admins are, you can reach out to them directly, or the contact in your footer should be a top level admin as well. So you can kind of get started by reaching out to them to add one.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
Perfect. So then that details page is usually pretty simple, right? Again, any of your kind of public announcement info goes there. Now the requirements is going to be your big input collection place, right? So your requirements page is the form where you're collecting things like a cover sheet, any sort of documents, so CVs and budgets, reference letters, all of those sorts of things. So I'm not going to go through every example, but as you're kind of gathering your materials, this is the place where you build out anything that you're collecting from your initial submitter. So if it's kind of a standard funding proposal, it would be from the faculty member. If it's a nomination, it would be the things you're collecting from the nominator, that initial form collection. So here I've made a contact information sheet similar to a cover sheet. So if you have a cover sheet now, one thing I would recommend is building out the fields on that cover sheet instead, right? So instead of having them upload the full cover sheet as a file, you're going to be able to extract the data a little bit better later if you have the separate fields. So for example, here's first name and last name and email address, right? So later, those are all going to be separate columns in Excel reports that you can do more data analysis with. So kind of look over your cover sheet and see which pieces can be built. Some of them, like first name and last name, will kind of already be built in InfoReady for you, and then others you may need to design. So, for example, a lot of them just start out as a plain text field here. So like if I drag this text field, this is what I used for the email address. Certainly something like their title, right? If it's a faculty program. So it could be something simple like this. So the text field would just let them type in kind of a one-line response. But you can also do things that are more, if you have checkboxes or things like that on your cover sheets, you can change this question type. So again, you can drag the question over from the toolbar, or you can just change it. So if you only have a list of 10 different titles that they could choose from, you might make this a drop down instead. And so with this question, then you would have the choices. They could pick associate professor, assistant professor, etc. So different options there, but in general, you are going to want to kind of build out your cover sheet with the question types rather than having them upload it. The rest of your form, again, kind of just looking at what you're using now. So a lot of times it's either a fillable PDF or a Word document. It might be a different online form. So certainly if you're using like a Google form or a Smartsheet form or something like that, it's a pretty easy one-to-one kind of recreation method. But you can build as much as you need. So generally it's going to be short answer questions. So things like, I have a project type here, and then you might also have some short answers. So here's a description. So that's a text area field. If you just want a paragraph type response, that's going to be the best fit for those. However, right, there are going to be times when you need those longer files. So that might be, again, budgets, CVs, things like that. And so that's what I've done here, like with my files. So that is just this file upload option. So if I drag that in here, this is now what my applicant can upload. So while we encourage you to kind of rebuild as a form, something like a cover sheet, a CV is going to be a CV. It's going to be that file upload. One kind of just quick tip in InfoReady that can often help your prior process. A lot of times, if you're just collecting these things manually, you don't have a lot of say over what types of documents are submitted. So with the file upload option, you can actually go into the settings. And for example, you can tell your applicants that you only want PDFs, right? So that again, just another way to keep your applications smoother, more organized, more consistent between applicants. And then finally, so this is a little bit more for folks that have used InfoReady before, but even if you haven't, you can kind of think of the InfoReady tools section as fancier things just beyond standard form questions and file uploads, right? So most of you will be able to build probably more than 95% of your form with just this top section. But the InfoReady tools is any of those additional features. So things like the add contacts tool I have down here. So this would actually let your applicants put other email addresses to be copied on their submission as it kind of moves through the process. So almost an auto carbon copy. You can also do things like auto route your applications to an initial approver, right? So someone that your applicant identifies. This is really common with student programs. So the applicant driven component might be a mentor or an advisor, something like that. Some of these tools, so like keywords and reference letters, you might not have. Those are based on your license level. But again, just additional functionality to collect key terms. Co-applicants lets you do like team projects or group projects. And then you've got reference letters, participating unit, user lookup. So all of these, again, just added functionality. Reference letters, I would say, is probably the second most common in here. So if you have a program where those external letters need to be added to your application, this is probably the tool that you want to use. So again, kind of going back to that initial inputs list, most of them will be here, but if you're not quite finding a fit on something that you need to collect from your applicant, I would try out some of these tools. You can always, what I really like about InfoReady too when you're building your forms. So let's say you're not sure if you need reference letters or not. You could actually put it in here and switch over to preview to kind of see what it would look like and if it looks similar to what you're already using. And if it looks good, you can kind of keep configuring it. If you don't need it, then you can just remove it. So pretty easy there. So I'll pause again there, Carlos. Anything about kind of initial application setup, those initial inputs from applicants?
Yes, we have a few questions. First, are there limits to the number of supporting documents that an admin can include in a competition?
It's a good question. So yeah, first let me clarify what we consider a supporting document. So supporting documents are those more informational files or basic templates that you want them to use. You can put them on your details page or in your requirements page or both. It's up to you. So remember on the details page, if you put them there, if I go back, it's way at the bottom, right? So if I add them in here, like I've done with this use case guide, that means that my potential applicants get to download that file even before they start their application. So it is kind of nice to give them a heads up of like, you're going to have to upload your budget in this specific format. There is not a limit on how many you can include that I know of. If you have a certain limit in mind, we'd be happy to test it out for you. But I've definitely seen 10 or more for folks. And then same thing here. So the only difference in putting them here is just that they have to have kind of started their application to then see the files within here. So it's just your preference on when you want to make those supporting documents visible.
Thanks, Sarah. Related question. Is there a limit to the number of file uploads?
Again, not that I know of. With the file uploads, it is one upload per field. So just kind of keep that in mind. So sometimes I do see folks add in one of these options and then they'll say, combine all of your documents into one, just kind of more for ease of ease of downloading later, but you can put as many as you need.
Thanks, Sarah. I have more questions. Um, so this is a two-parter. Is the project title still mandatory? Uh, it seems like the word title appears in reports you can download. Can the uh, field name there be changed as well?
Good question. So yeah, actually to show that, so this is one that's already been customized a little bit. So I'm just to make it super clear, I'm gonna just start a fresh one real quick. Because if you're making something from scratch, what you'll notice when you get to the requirements page for the very first time, it's actually called application title, and it is required. So you can't remove this field, but you can rename it. So that's what I had renamed mine to project title. Um, if you don't have a specific project or application title, I've seen folks just collect the date here, or maybe the initials and the date. What this field ends up being, and the reason it's kind of hard coded as a required field, is it does show up in a lot of different places in the platform. So it's going to be used in emails that go out to applicants and reviewers. It will also show up later, right? So we'll get to this in a bit, but this is kind of your administrator dashboard. So it's also that kind of main way that the submission is identified for you as an administrator to click on, and how it shows up when it's downloaded as a PDF. So just collect something there that is a line or less that's required, is usually a good rule of thumb with that one. But to answer the second part of that, I think it will always be called title in this grid. So just kind of keep that in mind. But you can rename it in your actual form.
Thanks, Sarah. I've got another one here. Um, could you, so what's the difference between using a file upload and a question or requirement question? What are the implications of doing one or the other?
I'm not sure what they mean by a file upload or a requirement question. You mean like a short answer question, you
Yes,
think?
any sort of question that needs to be
Okay.
filled in
Yeah,
versus
yeah.
uploading a document.
Yep, good question. Okay, so um at its root, right? So anything that I'm adding with these different field types that aren't the file upload. So all of those are going to be their own data points later. So that's in Excel. That's also going to be, again, in this data grid admin dashboard that you have access to, right? So you can actually then sort and filter on things. So for example, remember one of my fields was project type. And so that will allow me to quickly sort by project type. I can even like move these around, right? So it makes it more quick data that you can pull out, right? Whereas an upload, I think I have an upload in here. So like this, right? The upload, you'll be able to tell if they uploaded it and kind of click on it, but I don't know the content of that then until I download it. So that's where I said if something like a cover sheet, it might actually be better for you to recreate that in fields so that you can then pull out their email address, do a quick count of how many full-time faculty versus part-time or whatever it is, any of those kind of things that you need to help you make decisions later, any quick counts of things. The file uploads are going to be more narrative, supplementary, letters, CVs, longer files that are still important to the overall decision-making process, but you're not going to be able to kind of quickly sort and filter on those. I hope that made sense.
Right. And you can also export custom reports based off of fields that are filled out.
Yep.
Can't forget that.
Yep.
Or sorry, I should emphasize that because it's a
Yeah.
question we get all the time.
Yep.
Um, Okay, I'll let one other question for you, Sarah. Um, and you'll probably show this a little later. Uh, the the default fields here
Oh yeah,
on
let me go back here.
the,
Yep.
the default fields uh, are are those field labels changed on the data grid as well?
So this one is not. So yeah, if you rename any of these three default ones, they will not be changed. So the first and last name actually get combined to applicant, last name, comma first, and then title is whatever you have renamed application title to.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yep. Good questions. Okay, so then this is a good point to pause. So if you are creating a brand new process, you could kind of stop here, right? You could work through your details and requirements. You could go to finalize and launch your form and have folks start filling it out and then work on the other things I'm showing later, right? So those are kind of the key outputs that you're building. Obviously, for today, we're going to keep going with the routing steps. So routing steps is usually the part that requires the most brain power initially. This is where that process mapping, kind of drawing it out, can be really, really helpful. Though, again, you can launch without having this part done, and you don't have to have your specific reviewer set. So we get that question all the time, like, "Oh, we're still trying to figure out who's on this committee or what subject matter expert we have for this thing." That's okay. You don't need to know all of those details to still work in this area. Um, so this routing steps page is where you want to gather any of your approval forms or kind of approval processes, right? If you used to like have people email you to say they approve it, no more. You're going to build that in here. Any kind of rubrics or score sheets, you're going to build those in here. And specifically, you're going to build them in the order that they happen typically. Um, the first thing that's always built into our routing process, though, so a lot of times with that process mapping, the first thing that you want to do as the administrators is look over the applications yourselves, right? You want to check over the submissions, make sure they're eligible, check their materials, all of that. That actually doesn't have to be a routing step. That's captured by this little checkbox that says disable, accept, or return. It's turned off by default, which means you, as the administrator, are going to have the option to look at them first before it goes into this review process. So when you get started in here, you really want to think of, okay, who's the first person or people to look at these? That's not just, me or my colleague checking them over. Okay. Um, Not surprisingly, we've done entire webinars just on this page, so we're not going to cover everything in here, but just to kind of get your brain flowing here, right? So something like a rubric is often going to be with these comments and ratings combination. You can see they kind of go up all the way to 20 there, but mine is just a 2 version, kind of simple. And when you scroll down, the area that starts to be kind of light gray shaded, that's the part that your reviewers are seeing. So if you've got whatever your reviewers used to score in the past, you're going to kind of build that out on your screen with these comment boxes and numbering scales if it was a rubric based process. Um, if you are doing more of just kind of an approval, so a yes or no, again, if people used to just email you and say, yep, I approve of this one, the approve, do not approve could be the type for you, right? So this is just a yes or no, and should it go forward or not? So that might be a choice. And then finally, if you're like, my review score sheet is really fancy and I need to kind of build my own, we have a form designer option as well. So you would want to pick form designer. And then as you just saw on the requirements page, right, this should look pretty familiar. So this is kind of the make your own review form. So this definitely offers the most flexibility. So again, not going to go through every single option in here, but the key pieces are the step type. That's your actual action or form that your reviewers are doing. So are they approving? Are they filling out a rubric? What is that? And then all of these other pieces, fill them out if you have them, skip them if you don't. So if you know that this, um, this review form is going to be due on December 1st, go ahead and put it in there. That's going to save you time later. But if you're still figuring that out, no worries. Same thing with the default reviewers. If you know of the people that are going to look at this step for all your applications, put them in. If you're kind of subdividing your applications out, leave it blank. You'll do the assignments later. So again, back to kind of the slides at the very beginning, if you're thinking about just your inputs, this is your score sheets, approvals, any part of your review process. Anything kind of top of mind, Carlos, come in from this section?
Yeah, here's a question for you. Um, are there any tips or best practices for using the routing steps in conjunction with an external resource for reviewing applications?
So I take that to mean like the actual scoring has to be somewhere else, but they want to use InfoReady to maybe distribute the packets or something like that. Is that how you're
Yeah,
reading that,
yeah,
Carlos?
here we go. They say the person says we email a zip folder to the company who looks at the applications and then
Mm.
hires reviewers based on the expertise needed.
Ooh, okay, I like that example. So as long as there's multiple ways you could do that, but my favorite for something like that, where you're still going to get the data that you need in InfoReady, you could use this form designer for something like that. And then your form piece that they would fill out, that those external reviewers fill out, you would have them put in like recommended reviewer one, two, whatever, right? So let's say they need to give you like three names or something of people they recommend. Like this could be your form. You wouldn't even need an acknowledgement. You can delete that. Right. So it could be like a very simple form. But what this is doing, it's going to let you kind of more easily see, oh, they recommend, Sarah, Carlos, and Sally for this one, versus something else. So instead of sending them a zip, they would actually see the applications in the platform. If you're more like, they're not gonna log into InfoReady, like we're just not ready for that step yet, which is it happens, that's okay. You as the administrator are still going to have the power, right? Again, this one's launched, you've got all your applications in. You would still be able to download these in a zip folder, right? So you're at least downloading the packets for them. So the separate option is actually the InfoReady version of a zip. And then you could, again, email that to them. Obviously, I'm biased. We want you to do everything in InfoReady, but we get it. Or sometimes there's security restrictions or whatever where you're not allowed to let people in your site. So you could still use InfoReady to like generate those zip folders for you to make that process a lot quicker.
And Sarah, here we go. The person also asks, what if I don't get the names of the reviewers until they've scored them all?
Um, I'm not sure what that means.
But like if we're talking about assigning reviewers in some capacity,
Mhm,
you don't get the
mhm.
name of a reviewer, you can't fill out the
Right.
form or you can't make an assignment. And so if you don't get the names of the reviewers until they've already done the scoring, or do we have recommendations?
So, yeah, this one I was building more as the company that helps you find the reviewers. And then, right, so this would be like the part the company person does. And then you would actually have another step where you assigned those reviewers, then the actual reviewers to do their feedback. So it would be more of a sequential process. I might not be understanding that question still.
No, all good. And then um, you kind of went over one of the other questions we already have. Someone asked, can you assign one approver who's going to tell you who they want assigned as two reviewers? So you kind of went over that. It's a two-step process.
Yeah, I would probably do something like that as a two-step, unless that, the person that's assigning reviewers, unless they're already an administrator, you're going to need to kind of collect their recommended people in one step, and then in the next step, you would actually assign those recommended people to do the actual scoring then, right? So then this next step would be my scoring, let's say, is how you would do that.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I've got another example. I can't
Yeah.
put it on screen, but I'll try to talk it out. Um, I'm working with an institution that has a commercialization um, opportunity where um, they are collecting a first round of applications, and then they have industry advisors and reviewers who want to provide feedback. Now, the administrators don't want to invite all of the industry partners into the system. And also, it's like a 12-page feedback form that they don't want to take the time to put into InfoReady. So, what they're doing is having a point person as the reviewer who is who's sending out the forms to the different advisors, and then that point person is using a file upload in some way in InfoReady so that it's stored in InfoReady, all the
Mhm.
feedback, and when they uh, send the feedback to the applicants, they have it all in one place. So the process is managed here in InfoReady for the most part, and the communication back to the applicants is able to be managed.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Yeah, it's like as your review groups get bigger, you end up maybe only having a few do the info ready part just to keep that part streamlined. Yeah.
Okay, you go ahead, Sarah.
All right, yep, I know. As we mentioned, there's always routing steps questions. So just a couple things on your notifications page. So again, thinking back to inputs and outputs, this is kind of your messaging crafting area. So I worked with a group one time, right? They had their whole Google Drive and they had like a Word document of every email they sent to their students at different points in their process. And so in InfoReady, something like that, you could kind of prep your different messages in this customized email notifications area. Now, what you'll see in these is that there's always default language. So, for example, the your application received message that's under your applicant section. This is the message that your applicants will get when they click submit in the system. So this is kind of their confirmation email in a way. Right. And so actually let me restore the default here. So this is the default message. That one that you saw previously, I had already customized. So you can do quite a bit to craft these if you want to, but you can also just go with what we have and it usually does the trick. But certainly for something like your award or reject process, right? Usually you already have somewhere an example from a past email you sent out when you sent out the decisions. So you could go ahead and kind of mock that up in here and have it ready to go so that later when you're actually taking those actions in InfoReady, that messaging will be there. So again, you don't have to do it all before you launch or anything, but it's definitely a time saver, especially cycle after cycle, right? If you run the same program every year, your messages are just all saved in the platform. You don't have to go find an old one from the year prior, things like that. So we do have a full support article that like lists all of them and when the action occurs. But generally the list is organized by the recipient, so who's getting the message, and then basically in chronological order. So if you pull one up, you can kind of see what what that may reference. Last page then on here that I wanted to talk about are progress reports. So this may not apply to all of you, but if you have any post, I always call it the post final yes. If you need to collect information after your initial yes. So your initial yes could be awarding them something, it could be approving a trip, it could be admitting them to the honors program, right? So whatever your kind of award point is in InfoReady, do you still need to collect additional information after that point? If the answer is yes, then you might want to build some progress reports. So here I have an example of kind of one that's right after the award decisions are sent out, where I'm just asking them to confirm their award, maybe answer a couple basic questions, right? Nothing too complicated here. And then I also follow up with them a year later and I ask them for different outcomes and updates. So again, hopefully by now this form builder looks familiar, right? So it's the same kind of building experience, just at that very far end of time period. Similar to the routing steps, you can build these later. So don't stress about it if it's a ways down the road, which it often is with a brand new process. But definitely think about ways to use these, right? This is often something that you need to consider all of the different stakeholders involved in your process. I think people tend to really focus on their applicants, obviously, right? They're kind of the first touch point. Certainly the review process. Folks really, test that out and do a lot of thinking and planning. But I think the post award and kind of proving, right, the return on investment for some of your programs might be overlooked a little bit. So again, thinking about maybe higher up stakeholders or folks that are ultimately making decisions about funding or if the program will continue, things like that, integrating a form like this can really help gather that data for you. Anything else with kind of setting up programs, Carlos, or forms, these different pieces that came in?
I have a question I'm saving in case we have more
Okay.
time.
Okay, perfect. So let me, we've already talked about this data grid a little bit, but let me just highlight this a little bit more. So again, if you're newer or if you just kind of need a refresher. So once you launch your opportunity in InfoReady, then you get access to what I'm showing on the screen, which is we call it the manage view and specifically this data grid. So this area is broken up into stages, right? So we were just talking about those progress reports. I can see all of that specific information in my post award tab. So this is that higher level dashboard of everything that you're working with. A lot of times when folks are transitioning to InfoReady, they don't really have something like this right now. So it is a powerful tool to both see where your process is at. So I'm gonna just pull up my full view here, right? So even basic things like the status, just kind of knowing where things are at, especially if you manage rolling or ongoing projects. This is kind of your area to do all of that from. And then it's also going to be where you start kind of that export process, right? So all of your outputs that you need, you're probably going to be utilizing this grid. So the first way that you can get information from here is just a quick kind of maneuvering of the columns. So I already showed that earlier with my project type, but I can just choose which columns I want to look at and which ones I don't and apply that. And let's say that this is something that I need to look at every morning or every Friday or something like that and kind of do something with it. I can then go right next door to the grid view and save it. So you can see here, I have lots of saved views. So my dean of engineering likes me to send report every week. And so I have my engineering view that I've saved. And now to pull out this list, all I have to do is click the download grid. So this is, as Carlos mentioned earlier, right, kind of your custom report engine. So any of the fields that you care about in your process, you can pull out whenever you need them. It's also reiterating the point of why you might want to build out some of your questions as fields rather than file uploads, because then you can get the information like this. So that download grid button is exactly what it sounds like, where it's going to pull out what you see on your screen. So you saw that report only had, my 17 here that had all of this information in that order. So those are super powerful. Um, you can also pull out more in-depth reports with the download Excel reports. So that's, or sorry, the download reports button. But these are all Excel files. And so those would be generally if you're transitioning from a system that had more like built-in analysis for you or like higher level reporting, that's probably where you'll see that. And then with PDFs, so I showed the option of, if you need to pull out a zip folder, you can always do that with the batch PDF option. Anytime that you're just looking at one application, you can also pull out that packet, just kind of a one button click. So sometimes that makes it a lot easier to look at the application, certainly initially when they submit it and you're just kind of checking for eligibility and materials, right? This is going to be the quickest view. So there are ways to get those PDF outputs as well. So I will stop there. I'd rather answer questions that you all specifically have. So let's take those and then Carlos, just leave maybe like 3 minutes to close if we can.
3 minutes.
Or two, we'll go two. I'm looking, yeah, 2 minutes is good.
So, when you were showing the details page, sorry, the requirements page, Sarah,
Yeah,
someone noted that there was something called the nomination tool.
yeah. I
Any,
purposely didn't talk about that person. You're very sneaky eyes. No, I'm glad they asked. I just didn't want to go off on a tangent too early, but now we have time. So here I shall go. So this is a specific InfoReady tool. This is one that falls into what we call our tier 2 projects. So those are going to be more custom configurations. This one specifically does rely on a data feed into InfoReady that actually is not hooked up into this site. But what this tool actually lets you all do is you can feed us user data from your institution. And if you have a nomination process, right, you can, your nominators can actually look up the person, right? So if someone wanted to nominate me for an award, they could start typing Sarah or Yeki. And then not only would my name pop up, but it would also be any additional information that you're sending to InfoReady about me. So it could be making the form process a lot quicker for things like your primary title, your department, your user ID. For students, it can be things like their major or their program or their degrees, right? So all of that would then just kind of dump into the nomination so that the nominator really just has to know who they want to pick. And then you all get the data fed in. So it's a super cool, powerful tool. We don't have too many folks using it yet, but if you are interested, definitely reach out to your account manager about that.
thanks, Sarah.
Good
And
eye, good eye to that
yeah,
person.
yeah, it's in there. And by the way, Sarah mentioned this, but I do want to emphasize it. Um, we do try to limit deploying the nomination tool for groups that have an inbound data feed into InfoReady because it just works. It was designed for and works much better that way. Um, okay. Uh, we are clear on questions, Sarah.
Okay, perfect. So then let's just wrap up with a couple things because I know over the many years that I have worked with new folks and a lot of folks that have been transitioning from prior systems or processes, if I have one piece of advice, it would be to take the leap and then you can iterate. So what I mean by that is there's always going to be some specific piece that just doesn't quite fit exactly how you want it to, right? Whether you're using InfoReady or some other process, right? So pick away, take notes, and you can always make tweaks the next time you manage that process. Um, I think it also helps to communicate early and often if you can, right? Give yourself time, especially, I mean, you all know your certain programs that are either higher profile or you just get a ton of applicants, right? So as those processes are bigger or maybe just a lot more stakeholders involved, give yourself enough time to test some things out, communicate about any changes, and then also just consider a staged rollout. So we kind of mentioned that when we talked about the reviewers, right? If you have external reviewers, people assigning reviewers, Carlos mentioned the example where they kind of have one point person managing all of the documents and things. That's a great strategy. So kind of um, put the basics into InfoReady, the part that feels comfortable, and then usually it is something to do with the review process that you're just not, your committee is not quite ready to move all the way technology wise or something like that. So that is always fine. We're happy to coach you through those changes will hopefully ultimately, having InfoReady be one of the main tools that makes it easier for y'all. So that's my spiel. Don't be afraid. And then finally, we have a lot of great webinars coming up, both at the end of this calendar year and even into 2026 already. So quick reminder about the annual survey due next Friday is when we're hoping to have all of those in. There is a peer spotlight on Thursday. So we're excited to hear from our colleague at Rice University about how she manages faculty award programs. We've got, showing you new functionality, some RD stuff from Tufts, and then our classic refreshers in January, as well as a newer option of the Engage homepage. So we're busy, you're busy, and we thank you for taking the time. For anyone that couldn't get a question answered, we will get your questions answered in the next day or two. If it's a more urgent thing, you might want to just go right to the help menu and submit a support ticket to our team so they can kind of get back to you if it's timely. But those are our office hours on screen there. Anything else, Carlos, for the good of the order?
I think we're good. Thank you, everyone.
Hope everyone stays warm and we will hopefully see you on another webinar soon.